It was the only thing I was saying is that was very interesting, because I remember that night he talked about the European Masonic orders, and how the Mexican gangs in Los Angeles and around the country use Masonic symbols from a particular Masonic order in Europe, while the black gangs use an opposing symbols in terms and symbols of a different Masonic order in Europe. And that most likely the gang members themselves do not realize that these are actually can be traced back to Masonic symbols in Europe. And so I believe that the gangs going on in America today are being organized, directed, and financed out of Europe to destroy our culture in America. I think that European Freemasonry is heavily involved in destroying America. And you need to understand the whole story about how America was founded, and how it was founded as a corporation, as a privately owned corporation. We can we'll talk about that for days on end. And this is just my opinion, one man's opinion, but I'm going to give you my opinion as to the bottom line on the world today and the stuff that's going on the earth today. What we call Illuminati was originally a term which is given to us in Spain to a religious order in Spain that later on were amalgamated into what we call Jesuits. So the Jesuits are truly Illuminati themselves.
And the Vatican, and you go.
Well, that was what I was going to say. Yes, I believe that one of the most evil organizations that exist on the earth today, and you'd have to have spent all the years with me in libraries and research societies and traveling around the world and talking to other writers, authors, lecturers, and teachers, and collecting this stuff over a period of 45 to 48 years to understand what I'm telling you. But I believe today the most serious evil organization on the face of the earth is the Vatican. That's my personal opinion. I think if the Vatican was done away with off the face of the earth, there would be a shout of liberation heard around the world. Because the Vatican, in my opinion, is the bulwark of this dark thing that's happening on the earth. So when you talk about Illuminati, when you talk about the really dark criminal stuff that's going on the earth, you're talking the Vatican. You're talking the Knights of Malta, which gave us the 6 men who founded the CIA in America, were all Catholics, members of the Knights of Malta. When you begin to look at the banking fraternities in America, like the Bank of America, Union Bank in California, all of these people who founded these banks and today are running the banking establishment are all Knights of Malta, Catholic Masonry. So when I hear people talking about the Jews this, the Jews that, and the Jews are responsible, I said, no, you better go back and do your homework. The Jews have been slaughtered all over Europe by the Vatican. You need to remember that for at least 2,300 years, Rome has dominated Europe. Under the Caesars of Rome, and in the 4th century, late 4th century, the Vatican comes into being. And the Vatican dominates all of Europe, all the heads of state, all the princes and kings and rulers, all the kings and rulers in Europe ruled by the divine right. It's called the divine right of kings. What are you talking about? Who represents divine to give the king the right? The Pope. The Pope appoints certain families to be over the French. The Pope appoints certain people to be over the Germans and over the British. And so by divine right. Why? Because the Pope represents God. And the Pope says that this family is holy and that they should rule. And therefore they can now say they rule by divine right. And once you begin to realize how the Vatican has for over 2,300 years, Rome has dominated Europe, and in 1,600 years, the Vatican has dominated Europe. And Europe for 2,300 years has dominated the earth. So if you want to talk about conspiracies and you want to talk about evil, don't talk about Jews. You better talk about the people who would control Europe for over 2,300 years. Caesar of Rome, the Roman Catholic establishment. There's the real story. Now you're getting into mafiosi. Now you're getting into the fraternal orders of Freemasonry out of Europe, Knights of Malta. Now you're getting into the organized crime, Sicily, Corsica, and all of the profound drug running, white slavery, murder for hire, Vatican. I mean, even, what was his name, the producer of Godfather? What was his name? Francis Ford Coppola. And Godfather 3. Francis Ford Coppola and Godfather 3, the third one in the series, opens up with Michael Corleone being anointed by the cardinal in New York to be a member of the Knights of Malta in the Catholic Church in New York. What is he telling you? The connection between the Vatican, the Holy Father, there's nothing holy about the Holy Father. There's nothing holy in Israel. Nothing. But I know history. And I know that the most criminal organization on the face of the earth, in my humble opinion, I don't know that much about it, I've just been looking at it for 48 years, is the Vatican. As far as I'm concerned, it's the worst thing that's ever happened to the world, is what's really going on in the Vatican. And that doesn't even bring up the subject of propaganda due. P2, propaganda due, P2 Lodge, that was even mentioned in Godfather 3 twice. There's a Masonic order in Europe called Propaganda Due. It's called P2. And it's connected directly, P2 is connected directly through membership with Opus Dei and the Knights of Malta and the Jesuits. Jesuits, Opus Dei, Knights of Malta, Masonic order are connected directly to something called Propaganda Due, P2 Lodge of Freemasonry. P2 Lodge of Freemasonry is world famous to people who do research into criminal organizations. And P2 is pure, unadulterated, poured directly out of the trough, Nazism. Underworld organizations, drugs, human trafficking, pornography, violence, underworld organizations, all P2. They are the ones who are promoting the right-wing death squads in Central and South America, Mexico, the drug cartels in Colombia. We're talking Catholic, Knights of Malta, drug cartels, Colombia, extraordinary vice on a level which it is hard for most humans to recognize, and it's all being orchestrated out of the Holy Father and Rome. The men who founded our great nation would throw up with this treason, high crime and treason against the state by these people who call themselves America's leaders. I'm telling you, the Vatican has given us the mafia, drug running, prostitution, terrorism, violence,
child
pornography, all of it.
And the children that are disappearing.
We have been warned throughout history about the Jesuits, from presidents to famous founding fathers. Even H.G. Wells, in his book Crux Ansala, writes about the Jesuits. On page 105, he states, Roman Catholicism is a broken and utterly desperate thing, capable only of malignant mischief in our awakening world. On page 155, he says, I think that it stands for everything most hostile to the mental emancipation and stimulation of mankind. It is the completed, most highly organized system of prejudices and antagonisms in existence. Everywhere in the world, there are ignorance and prejudice, but the greatest complex of these, with the most extensive prestige and the most intimate entanglement with traditional institutions, is the Roman Catholic Church. It presents many faces towards the world, but everywhere it is systematic in its fight against freedom. And really the organism he's speaking of is the Jesuits. They run the Catholic Church. They have taken it over. And that is the malignancy. Here's an interesting quote by Lord Macaulay in his Essays on Ranks, Histories of the Popes, written in 1852. On his page 548, he states, "It is impossible to deny that the polity of the Church of Rome is the very masterpiece of human wisdom. The experience of 1,200 eventful years, the ingenuity and patient care of 40 generations of statesmen that have improved that polity to such perfection that among the contrivances which have been devised for deceiving and controlling mankind, it occupies the highest place." In his book, same gentleman, in his book History of England, he states, "The loveliest and most fertile provinces of Europe have under her, Rome's, rule been sunk in poverty, in political servitude, and in intellectual torpor." Charles Dickens, in a book called Life, described popery as the most horrible means of political and social degradation left in the world. Adam Smith, in his book Wealth of Nations, stated, "The Church of Rome is the most formidable combination that ever has formed against the authority and security of civil government, as well as against the liberty, reason, and happiness of mankind." Gladstone, in Speeches of Pope Pius IX, states, "When the Pope speaks of the liberation of the Church, he means merely this, that it is to set its foot on the neck of every other power." And of course, Charles Chiniquy, in his book 50 Years in the Church of Rome, warned that the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church, the Jesuits, had assassinated Abraham Lincoln. And it says, if you read this book, which you probably won't be able to find today, because it's, they say that the charismatic movement was actually created by the Catholic Church to kind of bring Christians into their web. It says that it's odd that so many, at a time when so many Catholics are leaving the Catholic Church, you're seeing more and more born-again Christians going into Rome, going into the Catholic Church. You would think that the testimonies of so many former Roman Catholics would be a sufficient warning to these poor deluded souls, but alas, Satan, still posing as an angel of light, captivated the hearts and minds of many. Of course, the root of this apostasy is sinful pleasure, for the charismatic movement allows its followers to do their own thing, with the word repentance being almost absent from their vocabulary. And although these reprobates have been bought with a price, they now deny the Lord that brought them, for they have chosen the way of Cain. May God use this message to turn some of these souls back into the way before they come to experience just what Paul meant when he said that they all might be damned who believed not the truth, but had pleasure in unrighteousness. It's 2 Thessalonians 2:12. A fellow named D. Martin Lloyd Jones, he wrote some books under the Zondervan label, stated the system, Romanism, is altogether more dangerous than is communism itself, because this is a counterfeit. This does it in the name of Christ. This is the Scarlet Woman. This is the most horrible, foul deception of all, because it uses his name. Let me warn you very solemnly that if you rejoice in these approaches to Rome, you are denying the blood of the martyrs. There is no difficulty about this. This is a counterfeit, a sham. This is a prostitution of the worst and most diabolical kind. It is indeed a form of the Antichrist, and it is to be rejected. It is to be denounced, but above all, it is to be countered. And Chiniquy did call the Pope the Antichrist. He really felt that this church was the church of the Antichrist. And of course, the Bible kind of describes the Catholic Church when it's talking about the whore of Babylon. J.C. Ryle, in his book, Warnings to the Churches, said, surely when the mind of God about idolatry is so plainly revealed to us in his word, it seems the height of infatuation in anyone to join a church so steeped in idolatries as the Church of Rome, to enter into communion with her when God is saying, come out of her, that ye be not partake of her sins, and receive not of her plagues, to seek her when the Lord is warning us to leave her, to become her subjects when the Lord's voice is crying, escape for thy life, flee from the wrath to come. All this is mental blindness. And he continues on, when Rome has repealed the decrees of Trent and her additions to the creed, when Rome has recanted her false and unscriptural doctrines, when Rome has formally renounced image worshiping, Mary worship, and transubstantiation, then and not till then it will be time to talk of reunion with her. Till then there's a gulf between us which cannot be honestly bridged. Till then I call on churchmen to resist to the death this idea of reunion with Rome. Till then, let our watchwords be no peace with Rome, no communion with idolaters. Well said the admirable Bishop Jewell in his apology, we do not decline concord and peace with men, but we will not continue in a state of war with God, that we might have peace with men. If the Pope does indeed desire we should be reconciled to him, he ought first to reconcile himself to God. Wow, that's pretty heavy. And the really crazy thing now is Pope Francis, the first Jesuit pope, mind you, and that was illegal, never supposed to happen. He's lining up with the Middle East and saying, come, let's all join together in one unity. Of course, right now it's unity. You have your church, but we're going to be together. But eventually you'll be coerced into being all part of the Roman Empire. It should be no surprise that the communist regimes that march the world, butchering all in its path, when you realize that Marx himself was trained by the Jesuits, people who did the Inquisition for 500 years and butchered everyone that was in their way. It's just an outgrowth of the same disease.
Knows a great deal about the persecution of Christians worldwide. He's Todd Nettleton of the Voice of the Martyrs Radio. So Todd, good to see you again. Thanks for joining us. You've been a voice for the voiceless, and you've helped a lot of suffering Christians over the years. So has the persecution grown worse? Has it lessened since you first started at the Voice of the Martyrs more than 2 decades ago?
I think persecution has increased and certainly in the last 20 years that I've been working at Voice of the Martyrs. And that's kind of the bad side of the coin. The good side of the coin is part of the reason the persecution has increased is because the church in places like China and North Korea and Africa is growing. So there are more new Christians to potentially be targets of persecution.
Okay, let's look at some specific countries then. This year, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo added Nigeria to the list of countries of particular concern. So why do you think Pompeo did that? What's happening in Nigeria?
Well, I think what we have seen in Nigeria over the last several years is the growth of Boko Haram, the number of attacks, the severity of the attacks, and I think really the unwillingness or the inability of the Nigerian government to put a stop to it, to protect Christian Nigerian citizens, particularly in the northern part of the country. I think, the State Department has been watching that for a number of years. They've commented about Boko Haram, and now they're saying, listen, this is a country, as a country, Christians and religious minorities are not safe there. That's why they've designated a country of particular concern.
And North Korea always seems to top most lists as worst persecutor. Has the plight of Christians there improved at all since President Trump reached out to Kim Jong-un, or are we seeing more of the same?
You know, there really hasn't been a significant change in how Christians in North Korea are treated. And the thing that people have to understand is that the Kim regime is built as a religion.
Christians in America have conceded under pressure. I've traveled enough and interact enough around the world to know that Christianity globally is under tremendous pressure. Now, they're hunting Christians in